I still remember the exact morning when I realized I'd been left out. My phone sat on the table, silent, while my family group chat, usually bursting with chatter, was unusually quiet for me. I'd seen snippets of excitement from my cousin's social media posts all week. Photos of wedding fittings, floral arrangements, the rehearsal dinner countdown. Everyone was buzzing about Lily's upcoming wedding. Everyone except me. Lily was the family's golden child. Perfect grades, perfect fiancé, perfect smile that could light up every conversation. I was her cousin, the one always compared but never celebrated. I was the one who studied quietly in my corner, who dressed simply, who never seemed to fit their definition of success. While Lily's photos were proudly displayed in every corner of my aunt's house, mine sat forgotten somewhere in a box, collecting dust. At first, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they'd forgotten to add me to the group chat where they were coordinating everything. So, I texted my mom, fingers trembling slightly over the screen. "Hey Mom, did I miss the wedding invite?" It took her an hour to reply. I stared at the little typing bubble that blinked on and off before her message finally came through. "Sweetheart, I think it's best if you sit this one out. You know how things are between you and Aunt Claire. It'll just cause tension." For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. The words looked innocent enough, but I could feel the weight of every unsaid judgment behind them. How things are meant the way Aunt Claire still blamed me for speaking up years ago when she humiliated me during a family dinner. How things are meant that I had refused to stay quiet when Lily took credit for a charity design project that I had done. How things are meant that I was never forgiven for standing my ground. I put the phone down slowly. My reflection in the living room window looked ghostly, someone invisible, unwanted. I wasn't angry yet. Anger came later. At that moment, it was more like a quiet ache, a sadness that seeped through everything. That night, I sat in front of my bathroom mirror and watched as tears rolled down my cheeks. Smudging the little makeup I'd put on earlier, I whispered to myself, "You shouldn't be surprised." And yet, I was. Every time they excluded me, it still hurt. It always did. Over the next few days, I tried to bury the pain under work. My small graphic design studio was all I had built for myself since college. I spent late nights hunched over my desk, finishing wedding invitations and corporate posters for clients who didn't know that behind every design was a woman silently trying to prove she was worth being seen. But 2 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. I was scrolling through social media during a lunch break when a post appeared on my feed. A group photo from the bridal shower. There they all were, my mother, Aunt Claire, all my cousins, even distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "Can't wait to see everyone at Lily's wedding next Saturday. It's going to be magical." The air left my lungs. They hadn't just forgotten me, they'd made a decision. A deliberate, cutting decision to pretend I didn't exist. The girl who grew up with them, who shared birthdays and holidays, who once made handmade cards for every single one of them, was now just a shadow they could conveniently erase. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. Then slowly something inside me shifted. The pain stopped burning. It crystallized into something colder, sharper, stronger. I whispered aloud, "Fine. If I'm not supposed to show up, then I will. But not as the girl they forgot. I'll show up as the woman they'll never forget." That night, I called an old acquaintance, Daniel. We had met at a charity gala I'd done the designs months earlier. He was the kind of man people turned to look at when he entered a room. Tall, self-assured, with an easy smile and a calm that felt disarming. When we'd spoken that night at the gala, we'd connected instantly. Not romantically, but sincerely. I remembered him saying, "You have a way of carrying pain like it's made of light." When I told him about my family, my exclusion, my plan to attend the wedding anyway, he laughed softly. "Then let's make an entrance they'll talk about for years," he said. "I'll go with you, as your date if you'll have me." At first I hesitated. "You don't have to—" He cut me off. "Emma, sometimes showing up is the best revenge. You don't need to shout, just be seen." Those words sank deep into me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Over the next week, I transformed, not for them, but for myself. I booked a salon appointment, something I hadn't done in ages. I let the stylist cut off the damaged ends of my hair and give me soft waves that framed my face. I bought a gown I'd never have dared to wear before, a champagne silk dress that shimmered like liquid under the light. It wasn't extravagant, just quietly breathtaking. Every detail of that week became a small rebellion, a skincare routine, a pair of heels I'd saved for someday. A delicate necklace my late grandmother had left me, the only piece of family I still carried with pride. The day before the wedding, I sat across from Daniel at a cafe. He looked up from his coffee and smiled. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "More than ever." He studied me for a moment. "You're not doing this to hurt them, are you?" I thought about it carefully. "No," I said finally. "I'm doing this to remind myself that I exist, that I don't need their permission to be part of my own story." He smiled. "Then that's the best reason of all." The morning of the wedding arrived, bright and unbearably warm. The city shimmered in late summer sunlight. I stood before my mirror one last time, adjusting my earrings. My reflection no longer looked fragile. It looked centered, poised, powerful. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, I thought about all the years I had stayed small, declining invitations, avoiding conflict, accepting the role of the quiet cousin. That version of me was gone now. In her place stood someone who had stopped waiting to be invited. When Daniel arrived to pick me up, I almost didn't recognize the person reflected in the car window. He looked devastating in a navy suit, but more than that, he radiated composure. He opened the car door for me with a smile. "Let's make some history, shall we?" The drive to the church felt surreal. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. For once, I wasn't going somewhere to seek approval. I was going to reclaim my voice, silently, gracefully. As we pulled into the venue, the grandeur of it hit me. A garden filled with white roses, golden ribbons draped over chairs, guests glittering in designer clothes. It looked like something out of a movie, and for a fleeting second I almost turned back. Daniel must have sensed it because he reached over and took my hand. "You belong wherever you choose to stand, Emma." I exhaled slowly and stepped out of the car. The world seemed to be still for a moment. Conversations hushed. Eyes turned. Whispers rose like ripples in water. "There she is. Is that Emma? Who's the man with her? She looks incredible." The power wasn't in their surprise. It was in my calm. Every step I took on that stone pathway felt like rewriting history. Aunt Claire, mid-conversation near the entrance, froze. Her smile faltered, her champagne glass lowering slightly. My mother, standing beside her, looked at me with an expression that flickered between guilt and awe. I didn't rush. I didn't wave. I simply walked with quiet grace, Daniel's arm steady beside mine. The soft wind caught the hem of my dress, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. We entered the church as if we were meant to be there. No invitation, no approval, just presence. Pure, undeniable presence. Inside, the music swelled, the guests rose, and all eyes followed the bride's entrance. But for the briefest second before Lily appeared, I noticed something different. The people who had once looked through me were now looking at me, and that was enough. I sat down quietly near the middle pews, my heart steady. I wasn't here to cause a scene. I was here because I refused to keep disappearing from my own life. As the ceremony began, I glanced sideways at Daniel, who gave me a small nod. His expression said everything. You did it. And in that silent, sacred moment, I realized that the revenge I had always imagined wasn't about vengeance at all. It was about visibility, dignity, and finally stepping into the light that had always been waiting for me. I didn't need their validation anymore. The simple act of showing up was enough. And as the vows echoed through the church, I sat there, tall and unbroken, thinking only one thing. They told me not to show up. So I did. And I became the moment they could never ignore. The moment I stepped inside the church, the air seemed to shift. The scent of white lilies and polished wood mixed with the faint perfume of expensive guests and whispers thick enough to drown in. Every face turned. Conversations faltered, laughter froze mid-air, and I could almost hear the collective gasp ripple across the room. All it took was one step, one soft click of my heel on the marble floor, and the entire place fell into stunned silence. Daniel's hand rested lightly at the small of my back, grounding me. "You're doing amazing," he whispered, his voice low and calm, as if we'd simply walked into a dinner party and not a battlefield disguised as a wedding. His confidence radiated through me like quiet armor. At the far end of the aisle, Aunt Claire's expression hardened into a mix of disbelief and irritation. She froze mid-laugh, the pearls around her neck catching the light as her hand flew to her chest. "Emma," she breathed, as though I were a ghost returning to claim my unfinished business. My mother's eyes flickered between her sister and me, caught somewhere between pride and panic. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I met their stares with a calm smile, the kind that says everything words can't. My heart thudded in my chest, but I refused to shrink. For the first time in years, I wasn't the awkward cousin hiding in the corner of the family photo. I was the frame they couldn't look away from. We walked together down the aisle as if we belonged there. The music hadn't started yet, so the only sounds were the shuffling of expensive shoes and the uneasy murmurs of people who had suddenly realized the family's quiet scandal had arrived. Dressed in silk and self-assurance. "Is that Emma?" someone whispered. "She looks different?" "No, she looks incredible." I didn't look around. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes tracing every inch of me. The dress that shimmered like molten light. The way Daniel's arm rested confidently around mine. The way I held my head high as if every whisper only made me stronger. Then, from the front pew, Lily turned. Her smile wavered for the briefest moment before she caught herself and forced it back into place. Her gaze met mine, calculated, uneasy. I nodded once, the faintest gesture of acknowledgement, then continued walking as if the air weren't trembling with tension. We found seats near the middle, not too close to the family but close enough to be seen. Daniel intertwined his fingers with mine and leaned slightly toward me. "You look like you were born for this moment," he murmured. "Maybe I was," I said softly, and for the first time I almost believed it. When the ceremony began, I focused on the details that once would have overwhelmed me. The glimmer of chandeliers, the sound of violins, the way everyone seemed to breathe in synchronization with Lily's every move. But instead of feeling small, I felt detached, almost serene. These people had spent years trying to define me by absence, but now my presence spoke louder than anything they could say. The priest's words blurred into the background. I watched my mother steal glances at me, her face unreadable. Aunt Claire avoided my gaze completely. I smiled slightly. Silence had never been so satisfying. After the ceremony, we walked out into the courtyard for the reception, where tables were lined with white linen and soft golden lights twinkled overhead. The garden buzzed with polite laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. I felt Daniel's arm brush against mine as we walked in. "Ready for round 2?" he asked. "More than ready," I replied, though my heart thudded against my ribs like a drumbeat. At first, people avoided me, pretending not to notice. Then curiosity took over. One by one, relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years began drifting toward us, their smiles too wide, their words dripping with rehearsed warmth. "Emma, my goodness, you've changed so much. You look stunning. Where have you been hiding?" "Oh, I always said you had potential." I smiled politely, answering every question with grace. "I've been working," I said. "I run my own design studio now." Before I could say more, Daniel chimed in effortlessly. "She's being modest," he said, his tone easy and confident. "Her work was recently featured in Modern Creative magazine. That's actually how we met. Her designs caught my company's attention, and the rest is history." The way he said it, so casually, so naturally, made heads turn. The same relatives who once dismissed me as a disappointment suddenly leaned in, eager to hear more. "That's wonderful," one of my uncles said, his voice too cheerful to be genuine. "Really impressive, Emma," another added. I nodded graciously, but inside something uncoiled. Satisfaction, not pride. For so long I'd begged for scraps of their approval. Now they were feeding off mine. Across the garden, Aunt Claire watched with thinly veiled disapproval. Her smile never reached her eyes. I could almost hear her thoughts, She wasn't supposed to come. She wasn't supposed to look like this. The sun dipped lower, the lights glowed warmer, and the reception began to feel almost cinematic. Daniel and I moved easily through the crowd, our laughter genuine. He knew when to step back and let me speak, when to lean in and deflect the prying questions with charm. Every time I glanced at him, I felt a strange mix of gratitude and calm, like he wasn't just beside me, but shielding me from the old ghosts that lingered in that place. Dinner was served under the canopy of lights, and the speeches began. Toasts about love, family, and unity filled the air, every word steeped in irony. When Aunt Claire stood, her diamond bracelet catching the light, a hush fell over the room. She raised her glass high, her voice smooth but sharp. "To family," she said, "to the people who always show up." The smirk that followed was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. It was meant for me, a final jab, a reminder of my supposed place. I smiled, calm and unshaken. Slowly, I lifted my own glass. "And sometimes," I said softly, my voice carrying through the air, "to the people who weren't supposed to, but did anyway." For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then came a wave of laughter and applause, light and polite on the surface, but beneath it, I could feel the silence. The uncomfortable kind that comes when truth slips through the cracks of civility. Aunt Claire's smile tightened. My mother looked down at her glass, and I sat there, steady and glowing, reclaiming the space they had denied me for years. After the toast, conversations resumed, but the tone had shifted. People looked at me differently now, less like an outcast, more like a mystery they couldn't quite define. The whispers had turned into admiration, confusion, envy, all of it mixed in a symphony I didn't need to conduct. Later in the evening, as the band played soft jazz and the crowd began to loosen with wine, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Lily. She stood there in her lace gown, bouquet set aside, her expression caught between curiosity and guilt. "You look happy, Emma," she said quietly. "I didn't think you'd actually come." I turned to face her fully. "You didn't invite me," I replied, my tone even, not cruel. She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "It wasn't personal." "It never is," I said, my voice gentle but steady. "Until it is." Lily's eyes darted up to mine. There was a flicker of something there, regret, maybe even shame. For a moment I almost pitied her. She had everything they praised, yet somehow she still looked uncertain in her own perfection. Before either of us could say more, Daniel approached. He placed his hand lightly on my back, a gesture so natural it made Lily's composure falter. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice kind but protective. Lily smiled weakly. "Just catching up," she murmured, then stepped away, her gown whispering against the floor as she disappeared into the crowd. I watched her go, feeling strangely light. Not triumphant, just free. As the night deepened, Daniel and I found a quiet corner near the garden's edge. The string lights flickered overhead, casting soft golden halos on his face. "You handled that with grace," he said. "I didn't come here to fight," I replied. "I came to stop apologizing for existing." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. Mission accomplished. I looked out over the crowd, at the people who once saw me as forgettable, now watching me with wary admiration. And I realized that this wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could walk back into the same room that once broke me and still hold my head high. When we finally left the table, several relatives called out cheerful goodbyes. Their words sounded warm, but I heard the undercurrent of disbelief beneath them. They weren't sure what had just happened, only that the family dynamic they'd taken for granted had shifted in one evening. As Daniel led me toward the exit, I caught my mother's gaze one last time. She gave a small nod, hesitant, conflicted, but somehow respectful. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement she had ever given me. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The music and laughter faded behind us, replaced by the soft hum of crickets and the distant city sounds. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders finally relaxing. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You know," he said with a small smile, "for someone they didn't invite, you stole the whole show." I laughed quietly, the sound unfamiliar but liberating. Maybe that's what happens when you stop waiting for permission to show up. He looked at me with something like admiration. "That," he said, "is the look that changed everything." And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like the world had finally caught up to who I'd always been. Not the girl left off the guest list, not the relative they whispered about. Just Emma, seen, steady, and unforgettable. The night air felt different the moment I stepped outside. It wasn't just cooler, it was cleaner, lighter, as though the weight I'd carried for years had been quietly lifted off my shoulders. The laughter and music from the wedding hall echoed behind me, muted by the thick glass doors. I could still see the blurred silhouettes of people moving inside, laughing, talking, pretending, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to be part of it. Daniel followed me out a few minutes later, his jacket slung over one arm. He didn't say anything at first. He just draped it gently around my shoulders, his fingers brushing against my skin, with a warmth that made the chill fade instantly. "You did it," he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness. "You showed up," I smiled faintly. The garden lights flickered around us, glowing like quiet stars in the darkness. "I did," I whispered. "And they'll never forget it." I turned to look through the glass doors again. Inside, my family moved in slow motion, bathed in soft golden light. Aunt Claire was still talking animatedly to a group of women, her laughter a little too loud, her gestures too sharp. I could tell she was trying to reclaim control of the evening, to rewrite the story that had slipped from her hands the moment I arrived. My mother sat beside her, quiet and thoughtful, occasionally glancing toward the door, as if part of her still wasn't sure if she wanted me to return or stay gone for good. "They're all still talking about you," Daniel said, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "I know," I said, exhaling slowly. "But this time it's not because I embarrassed them. It's because I reminded them I exist." He looked at me, his expression softer now. "You didn't remind them, Emma. You showed them." For a moment, we just stood there in silence, listening to the faint hum of the city in the distance. The garden smelled faintly of roses and champagne. The stars above were scattered like shards of truth, beautiful, distant, and untouchable. "I used to think revenge meant making them suffer," I admitted quietly. "That if I could just make them feel the same pain they made me feel, I'd finally find peace." "And now?" Daniel asked. I smiled faintly, my gaze still fixed on the glowing hall. "Now I think it's about peace itself, about walking away with my dignity intact, about not needing to prove anything anymore." He nodded slowly, and I could see something like pride in his eyes. "That's the kind of revenge they'll never understand. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to be announced," I added. The night stretched on, the sounds of celebration slowly fading into the background as more guests began to leave. I watched them from afar. People who once looked through me, now glancing toward the door as if half expecting me to come back inside. For years I had begged for a seat at their table. I had begged to be seen, to be valued, to be loved the way I loved them. But walking into that wedding taught me something I should have learned long ago. I didn't need their permission to exist in my own story. The glow from the venue softened behind me as we walked toward the car. The gravel crunched beneath my heels, and each step felt like a quiet exhale. I looked up at the moon, full, gentle, and indifferent, and realized how small that entire world behind me truly was. When we got into the car, the silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words ever could. Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need to. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on my knee, grounding me in the present. I stared out the window as the lights of the city flickered by, thinking about every moment that had led me here. The tears I'd swallowed, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the countless times I'd stayed small just to keep others comfortable. Every memory hurt, but strangely I was grateful for them now. Without them, I wouldn't have become the woman sitting in that car tonight. I used to believe love meant being accepted, I said quietly, my reflection faint in the window. But now I think love means accepting yourself, even when no one else does. Daniel glanced at me, a soft smile on his lips. That's a hard thing to learn. I think it's the only thing that really matters, I replied. We drove in silence for a while longer, until he finally pulled over near a quiet overlook. Below us, the city stretched out in glittering lines of light, like veins pulsing with life. I stepped out of the car, the wind brushing my hair, the fabric of my dress catching the moonlight. Daniel joined me, leaning against the car beside me. So, he said lightly, what happens now? I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. Now, I said slowly, I stop waiting. For them? He asked. For anyone, I answered. For approval, for apologies, for closure, I think I've finally permitted myself to move on. He nodded, and the quiet stretched comfortably between us again. I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance, the chirping of night insects, and my own heartbeat. Steady, calm, free. I turned to him and smiled. Thank you, I said softly. He frowned slightly. For what? For reminding me that I never needed an invitation to live my own story. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes steady and warm. You always had that power, Emma. You just forgot it for a while. The honesty in his voice made my throat tighten. I swallowed hard, blinking back the tears that had been threatening to fall all night. Not tears of sadness, but of release. Yeah, I whispered. I think I did. We stood there for a long time, just watching the city below us, both lost in our thoughts. The lights flickered like memories, some distant, some too bright to look at for long. But for the first time, I wasn't haunted by them. A week later, my phone rang. It was my mother. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me said to answer. Her voice was softer than I remembered, fragile even. Emma, she said hesitantly. Everyone's still talking about you. You looked happy. I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. I am. There was a pause, filled with everything we'd never said to each other. Then she spoke again. I didn't know you and Daniel were friends, I interrupted gently. Good friends. He helped me remember who I am. She was quiet for a long time after that. I'm glad, she finally said. You deserve that. For the first time in years, there was no resentment in her tone, just truth. When the call ended, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The world looked different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. Revenge, I realized, isn't always loud or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the calm smile you wear when they expect you to break. It's walking into the room they told you not to enter, and leaving stronger than anyone imagined. Aunt Claire never reached out after that. And strangely, I didn't need her to. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore, because the real victory wasn't their silence. It was mine. I had learned to let go without bitterness, to exist without explanation, to forgive without needing to hear, I'm sorry. That night, as I lay in bed, the world outside faded into a peaceful hum. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who used to wait by the phone for invitations that never came, who used to measure her worth by other people's acceptance. I whispered to her, it's over now. You can rest. I didn't just show up to that wedding. I showed up for every version of myself that had been silenced, ignored, or forgotten. I showed up for the woman I'd hidden away for far too long. The next morning, I woke up early, sunlight spilling across my sheets. I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and for the first time in years didn't reach for my phone. I didn't need to scroll or compare or seek validation. The world outside was still loud, still spinning, but I was steady. Later, Daniel texted me, coffee later? Or too soon to celebrate your grand return? I laughed to myself and typed back, celebrations overdue. As I hit send, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest, contentment, the kind that doesn't need witnesses or applause. Because in the end, the real revenge wasn't in making them regret excluding me. It was in becoming someone they could never ignore, not because I demanded their attention, but because I no longer needed it. And as I stood by the window, watching the city come alive, I whispered the words that had carried me through it all. They told me not to show up, so I did. And I'll keep showing up, not for them, for me.